Hello, everyone. This is Kyla from Hidden Gems Literary Emporium, your family owned nonprofit community bookstore. And we have a special guest today, all the way from Canada, Mr. Peter Fleming, the author of this book, Insignificant Others, which is on display and available here at Hidden Gems. Thank you, Mr. Fleming, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. You look very vibrant.
Thank you.
No problem.
Oh, so do
Um,
you.
oh, thank you. So why don't we begin by you briefly introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about why you wrote this book?
Um, well, I wrote it under very serendipitous circumstances. I had been a fairly successful writer for years and years and years. And I was a teacher as well. And I had a very, very mind-altering experience with trauma. Um, I came away. I was forced to retire basically from teaching. It was just I was traumatized, and as a result, I experienced about 2 years, 2.5 years of trying to dig myself out of an early grave. Basically, I was concerned about suicide. I was terrified because I didn't know whether this was something I could ever, conquer, ever get over it. Um, and I had no idea how bad could get before it reached, rock bottom. You feel like, oh, I can't possibly feel any worse, but you don't know that until you find out. And for the longest time, it felt like there was no bottom to be reached. Obviously, I went into therapy. I met a psychiatrist, a very lovely, nice person who I credit really for being there for me. I saw her once every twice a week at first, and then slowly as I got better, that leveled out. But she asked me whether I had any interest in writing a journal. She didn't know that I'd already, like, I was writing for newspapers, I was writing for magazines, I was publishing short stories. Um, I mean, I was a known entity, at least in this city. Not that well known, I guess. And the subject of my writing never came up. So she asked me if I was interested in writing a journal, and I said no. Actually, I've never actually had any kind of interest in writing a journal, but that gives me a good idea. So I called up my friend, my editor at the Spectator, an old friend dating back to our university years, Tom Hogue, to whom this book is dedicated, actually. Without him, there would have been no book, for sure. But I called him up and I said, look, I've been through this horrible experience. I'm getting over it, but I'm bored. I need something to occupy my time. And I feel like I've reached a point now that I can do something. I don't know what. I couldn't stand to watch TV. I couldn't. Listening to music gave me no joy at all. Um, it was like a gigantic absence of emotion that is, I think, at the root of depression in general. But and without a vocabulary, it's hard to describe what that feels like. But anyway, I told him, I said, look, give me a job. Let me do some freelancing for you, just to take my mind off of things. And he said, well, I can't believe that you got in touch with me, because as it just so happens, we're opening up on the spec.com, we're opening up this new endeavor to reach out to readers and writers to talk about whatever was on their mind to talk about. And he knew my writing from our university days. He was the editor of the Silhouette, the school newspaper. as well. So we had made good contact with each other, and he was aware that I was a pretty good writer, and was interested in seeing what I was up to. So I said, well, this is open. Try to keep it under 1,500 words, which of course that never happened. But so eventually I tried to keep it under 3,000 words. But anyways, so I said, yeah, okay, I could write, but I don't really feel like I want to write about, this traumatic experience yet, although I would eventually. But I didn't want to get into it. I wanted to write something a little bit more joyful, to take my mind off these things. And he said, I don't care, just I don't care what you want to write. Just write me something. Write me anything you want. Just submit something. So I did. The first one was a story called Little Pink Car, which is in this collection. And I just kind of like snapped it off. I was driving that same little pink car at the time, and getting a lot of hazing, getting a lot of hassle for it. So I just sat down and wrote this story, and it was all by email, obviously. He emailed me back almost immediately and said, Peter, you just made my day. This is a great story. And I said, thank you. And he said, just keep them coming, keep it up, So I did. I tried my best to, I really wasn't interested in tackling the elephant in the room, which was my depression. But I was certainly interested in just letting my imagination go wherever it felt like going, as I got into a kind of a weekly sort of like rhythm of writing one story a week. That was my goal in life at that point in time. I was on long-term disability. I was, technically speaking, I was a mess. But I found that the therapeutic value of just doing this thing that I love to do had great value to me. And I got more and more ambitious and more and more interested in testing my abilities with this interesting, sort of like public format that I could, reach the readership, a fairly big readership of people who were not shy about emailing me in and telling me what they thought of my, thought of my work, for good or bad. But the big secret, of course, was that I wanted to write about the experience of being suicidal, the experience of being that depressed that you sort of it's a strange phenomenon when you discover that there really is something worse than death. I mean, that sometimes life can be worse than death, which is, I think, a great motivator for people who kill themselves. They come to the realization I almost said for good or bad, but it's always for bad. They come to the realization that there is something worse than dying, and therefore they kill themselves. And I felt like I was kind of flirting on the knife edge of these very self-destructive feelings, and I wanted to write about the experience, but I didn't have the vocabulary because depression is really an absence of emotions. You don't feel any sadness or joy or anger or anything. My phone's ringing, but I'll let it go. So lacking the vocabulary, I sort of began to realize that I was feeling my way towards getting into some of these more personal, intimate issues that I really didn't know how to tackle directly head on, but eventually I did. I wrote the story that mainly discusses that was not that's the name of the book, was The Little Gulag, which I don't know if you've read that one yet, but it's towards the end of the book, for the simple reason that I put it off and put it off. I mean, Tom used to say, it's like, you keep on telling me about this story, The Little Gulag. When am I going to see it? And it's like, oh, I can't bear the thought of even getting into that yet. But of course, that didn't stop me from talking about it, obsessing about it, really, for quite a long time before I actually wrote the story. But that was it. Getting that out, getting it right, which I'm not even sure I did get it right, because, like I say, it's so difficult to describe these things. I mean, there have been famous authors like Philip Roth, for example, wrote about being depressed and how he likened it to being torn apart, which I thought was close, but you have to, it's sort of like you're feeling around for metaphors for these things, to be torn apart. David Foster Wallace, who actually I wrote an essay about him that is in the book. He described being depressed he described depression as being a black hole with teeth. And I thought, well, that's vivid. I don't know how accurate it is, but I think I know what he's, again, it's sort of like reaching out and feeling around for the best possible way to describe something that really we just don't have a vocabulary for it. So, I mean, I did my best. It was a hard story to write. It took weeks and weeks and weeks to write it and rewrite it. I wrote it once and rewrote it about 100 times, trying to get it as accurate and as truthful and as honest, and so sort of like to just dig down and reveal something about the profundity and the fragility of our mental well-being, how easily it can be lost, and how fragile. Even I considered myself to be kind of like a bulletproof wonder. I've been teaching special education for 25 years, and I've seen all kinds of troubled children, and you sort of develop sort of a thick hide after a while. So you don't think anything is going to be able to hurt you, and then you find out that something is able to hurt you, and that's it. If you're me, you write about it. I don't know how other people deal with it. I mean, I was lucky in that I had the means to write well, and I had an outlet that was only too willing to indulge me in writing this very long, difficult piece, and to get it out to the public. So, and now it's in the book too, obviously. So thank you for helping me get my sad tale out into the public. I think that's where it belongs. That's where people who may be facing the same perilous voyage that I did might get some consolation out of it, or maybe some practical instruction on how to deal with it.
I want to thank you for finding the courage and the strength and the ability to put your story out on paper for us all to take with us for the rest of our lives, because this book is real. People, my children, our children, generations down the line, they will be able to read this book. And so your story is now a part of literary and literal history. And so, we thank you for that. And
well, I thank my psychiatrist, because it was her idea. Write a journal, which is whenever the stories began coming out, she says, oh, this isn't what I had in mind as a journal, but it's good stuff. So
I like the format of it. And
Oh,
I want to get deeper into the book and the stories, but I want to ask you one question. So you were saying in the beginning you didn't have, or you couldn't find the vocabulary to describe what you were going through or how you felt at that time. So was there something that happened, or was it kind of like a process to where you were able to put the words together?
probably. I mean, what I lack the vocabulary for is something I think we all lack the vocabulary for, and that is how to describe the absence of something. Um, in this case, the absence of our everyday emotional experience of interacting with the world. I mean, we need to have an emotional connection with the world just as surely as we need to be able to see it or hear it or feel it. And without that emotional connection, we get cut off, and it's a connection that has to do with an absence of feelings, as opposed to some monstrous feeling that bubbles up out of the black hole with teeth and to engulf our lives. It's the absence of those feelings that I mean, how do you go about describing that? It was not easy, and I found myself getting philosophical. I found myself getting kind of like literary, trying to dig up the right sort of corresponding uh, metaphors that would help get across this essential truth about human nature, that without an emotional attachment to this world, we're cut off from it and cut off from ourselves as well. Martin Buber, he was a fairly well-known rabbi and philosopher, wrote a book called I and Thou, Ich und Du in German, the original German. And in it, he sort of talked about, well, the I and Thou, the I is ourselves, and the Thou is the other significant thing out there, whether it's a person, a place, a thing. It's something that we relate to. It's a relational event, he called it. Um, and that as opposed to I and it, which is to say the background order of the world, which needs to be there. We need to be able to perceive the world as an orderly place. Otherwise, it would just be chaos. But so that's the I and it. And then the I and thou is when we reach out and touch something or someone, and they become significant for us. If you take that away altogether, what you're left with is depression. And it's not so much a physical feeling as the sense of the absence of something that we need. We do need to have in order to live. And then, of course, if it goes on too long, if it goes on long enough, you wind up with people thinking, I'd rather be dead than feeling this way. And they do. They kill themselves. I mean, the thought crossed my mind. I don't know how compelling it was as thoughts go. I obviously didn't do it. I was certainly I was surrounded by an army of supporters, professionals, professional nurses, psychiatrists, and so forth and so on, but also my family and also the people that liked my writing. I mean, they just, I was getting all kinds, getting emails from Texas. It's like, who the heck is reading my stuff down in Texas? Turns out it was somebody who knew Jenny Green, and she wrote, and she was actually there at the time, and said that I had brought a tear to her eye because I had captured Jenny's spirit so well. which of course was what I was shooting for at the time, and I was pretty proud of that one. But anyways, so anyway, I had all kinds of support, more than I think I should have been more grateful. I wasn't thinking in terms of, how grateful I should be, and how other people stuck in my position probably didn't have the same kind of resources that I had to get through that time, and to not only to get through it, but to write a couple of books, not specifically geared to that subject, but they were certainly the results of that experience for me, and so I am grateful for that.
Sometimes when we do things, and sometimes when we go through things, when we're going through it, we don't understand or overstand why we're going through it. Or when we come out of it, we look back and we say, okay, I just came out of this horrible situation. So what now? How is that going to push me forward in life? Or sometimes when you write, or not even just when you write, when you do things in this world, you don't know the effect or the ripple effect that it could have on people. And so, this book, I believe, is a ripple effect. And so, you put it out into the world, and it's touching people, and you don't even really know how far that ripple could go.
That's true. And that brings to mind, like, the idea, I mean, this was all something I kept to myself. I was not, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell anyone that I had retired. I had been forced into retirement, because I didn't want them to worry, which I think is a very common reaction, that people who are struggling, they don't want to worry their loved ones, so they shut up about it. But also just knowing full well that I didn't have the vocabulary, the resources to describe what I was going through. I mean, I was speechless on the subject of what I was experiencing, and therefore another good reason not to talk about it, really. I mean, if you can't explain it, what's the point of talking about it? But I could write about it, so that I could do, and I sort of warmed up to it, and sort of like approaching a tiger from behind, like you don't want to make any sudden moves. But eventually, I sat down and I poured myself a glass of whiskey and went to work. Got down to some. This is water, by the way.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, eventually you sort of fortify yourself and then get down to the dirty business of coming to grips with an extraordinary time in my life. That whenever I was done writing about it, it was like, well, I think I would have rather skipped having to go through that ordeal, but having gone through that ordeal, I'm pretty proud and pleased that I had something to do with it, which was, of course, to write about it. So.
And we're so glad that you decided to write about it.
Thank you.
Can we talk about the cover really quick?
Sure.
Okay. I think it's kind of cool. Can you tell us what is the symbolism behind this?
Well, for one thing, it's a very graceful young woman, who is striking a pose, which to me is kind of like, well, she's a ballerina, so that's part of what she does. She is a professional striker of poses. But what I loved about the picture was that her head was down, so you couldn't see who she was. She was anonymous. She could have been anybody at all. And the fact that the I don't know whether those things are called tutus. The thing that she's wearing is actually the puffball of a dandelion, which would seem to imply a certain amount of delicacy, a certain amount of fragility. I think we've all got our own dandelion puffballs with us at all times, and she's just wearing hers in a particularly graceful manner. So basically that. Also, it was kind of like a cross-like configuration with her arms out as though she was on a cross. I think that was part of it as well. My first book has, there it is. It has a cross on it, a Celtic cross, see it? To symbolize the Irishness of the story, but also the impetus of modern Christian, dogma, theology, life, whatever you want to call it. So that, I guess that cross symbol is sort of like, somebody pointed that out to me. It's like, I never even thought about that until it had it pointed out to me. It's like, well, you've got that's a kind of a cross too. And so, yeah, I guess it kind of is. I just like the anonymity of the character. You can't see her face, so she could be anybody. And not only could she be anybody, but she was surrounded by this very, very delicate veneer, a delicate atmosphere, which we all do. We all have that. It doesn't take much to damage a dandelion after it blossoms. So
and when your description of that reminded me about what earlier, how you were talking about the fragility of mental well-being.
Yes. It's very, I mean, really, we normal people, we go through hard times, good times, without being too shaken up. So we sort of assume that we're indestructible to a certain degree. Children, of course, so they're like that times 10, right? You probably know that. They would walk out into traffic without thinking twice about it if somebody wasn't there to tell them not to. So like adults do that too, like where we assume that we're indestructible until something comes along to let us know that we are not indestructible, that there is something out there that can hurt us and do serious damage. And I think once you've discovered that, you're never the same again. I like to think, I mean, I'm talking, like it feels like I'm talking away. I haven't spoken this much in,
We're listening.
6 weeks. It feels like a lot, but anyways, yeah, it's like, it feels like every day sort of like I wake up grateful. I mean, to much more so than I ever did before all this. The book is there to remind me in case I forget that I do have a lot to be grateful for, and I try to live a normal life as much as possible. I shouldn't say this, but I don't really like talking about my work and my books and my writing, although I'm certainly enjoying this. But as a rule, it's like, friends of mine are, that's like, well, what are you writing now? It's like, well, I don't want to get into it, it doesn't matter. But so there's that. I don't forget now why I brought that up. It seemed important at the time. I guess just because it's a way of digging myself out of a serious problem. I take writing seriously. It's not the sort of thing I normally care to carry on about, although I am doing that, but I'm enjoying it. Believe me, I am enjoying this. But
so are we.
If we were in a pub together and just chatting, and you asked me about my writing, I just like, I don't want to talk about that. But this is fun.
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
I am enjoying it.
I'm having such a pleasant time listening to you, honestly.
Well, I'm glad.
And okay, so what you just said is a great segue into another question I was going to ask.
Okay.
Okay, so this is more of a technical question.
All right.
We were talking earlier about the format and how I said that I like the format and I like how it's divided into sections. I my husband and I were big fans of the table of contents, and so your titles are very catching. You know, it's almost as if every single one makes you want to skip ahead. Like my eye just went to my rubber allergy, which I'm like, rubber allergy. What is that? Let me go to page 88 and see what that's about.
That's a
So
story.
go ahead. What is that?
That's a story about being afraid to go into a pharmacy and buy prophylactics.
Wow.
I was allergic to rubber at one point, but
Seriously?
no, not really.
Oh.
I mean that is what the story is about, but it's an amusing story. Intended to amuse. Yes, my rubber allergy.
Do you come up with the titles before or after you write the story?
Usually before. Yeah, I mean, mind you, the working title doesn't necessarily. I'm just going through my copy here, looking for something to jog my memory. But I mean, I could come up with a title. Girl in a Bottle, say, that was a story. I knew what I was going to be writing about. I knew I wanted to call it Girl in a Bottle and why I wanted to call it that. So that stuck all the way through. Whereas Wallace's Big Ships began life with a different title. A lot of these stories had different working titles, or slightly similar titles, but not exactly the same. So that's kind of like I would come up with a title, but that wouldn't be the last word. I mean, I can, at the end of it, I would change the title if I wanted to. I changed a couple of titles just because whenever it came time to publish this book, I was going through all of the stories and deciding which ones I was going to put in the book. And I changed some of the titles just then, spontaneously. Like entropy is no, that's not one. Anyway, yeah, the titles are very, they're not disposable, but I'm not married to any one title at any one given time. As long as it captures something of the story, I guess.
You're flexible.
Flexible.
Yeah. You go with the flow of how you
feel.
Yeah.
When it comes to titles, titles, of course, are also very important, but because if it has a provocative or interesting title, it's going to draw you in. It's going to know. I wonder what he means. My rubber allergy. I wonder what he means by that. So, and you'll be more likely to want to read it. Or I see entropy is the fate of everything. I remember you can tell even just by the title. It's like this guy is not in good shape. Entropy is the fate of everything. But I chose that title before I even began the story, not really knowing exactly how I was going to work it in to the story. But I did figure out a way eventually to work it into the story. But I just knew I liked that title. And it's sort of like it caught something about the flavor of the story that not necessarily spelled out in the story, but the mood of the story, I guess. So they come in all different kinds, all different ways.
Another thing that I really like about this book is, we were talking about this earlier, there are a lot of historical references in this book. And okay, what do I mean by that? When we talk to young readers, the youth, when they come in here, we always tell them, if you are reading a book that is fictional and you see capitalized letters, names, places, dates, and time periods, chances are that they are rooted in real history and that it might actually be a real person, place, thing, etc. So you have a lot of things like that. And Raymond and I, and our son Truth, we love history. So we were kind of giddy to see all of that.
Well, I mean, that's I'm looking now at the story Dada was that that fit in well with my because of the the suicide connection. I mean, this were people who were using suicide as an artistic expression. They didn't. This is just after the First World War, and everything was changed. Everything changed. The 19th century was ancient history, even if it was only 1914, barely into the new start of a new history. But there was a sense, though, that everything was different now. And the Dadaists, as expressions, artistic, it's an artistic movement. But the same thing with Joyce, James Joyce, a new kind of literature, Picasso, a new kind of painter, new kinds of architects in the Bauhaus movement of architecture. They all realized that the old game was finished and the new game had begun, and it had not begun very well, because they had just gotten over this gigantic, was called the Great War, until we had enough of them that we could be bothered enumerating them. Became the First World War after that. But it was not a good beginning to the 20th century. And there's a lot of people trying to find ways of expressing that or capturing that in artistic form. And the Dadaists, to their, to their credit, I guess you could say, in a curious kind of way, had taken that to a very logical extreme, and they began making murals and sculpture out of junky old found pieces of junk. And ultimately, they decided that killing themselves in some spectacularly meaningful manner would be an interesting sort of belle art, sort of like the dramatic art of non-existence. That's kind of hard to believe that they did that. And of course, a lot of people don't know who the Dadaists were, and that's the way they liked it. They didn't want to be famous, or they didn't want people to be too aware of their existence, even, which they got that wish that came true. Except, of course, now when I discovered them, I thought it was just a heck of a weird story, and obviously weird enough that not only did I write about it for the Spectator, but the essay went into the book, just because I thought the suicidal connection made it appropriate for the book. There's not a lot of suicide in the book, but there is some.
Mm-hmm. I did not know that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've got all kinds of. The Dadaists had a go at every form, really, of creative license that you can take in this world, whether it's written or musical. Stravinsky, probably he wouldn't have qualified as a Dadaist, but he certainly, that kind of irritating sort of like anti-music was right up the Dadaist alley. And all these other things, including performance art, which in this case, sort of like it's a pinnacle. It reached a pinnacle in these people killing themselves in very bizarre, unusual, creative ways. So that's it.
Mm. And it's interesting because as you were saying that, I flipped open to page 95, and the first sentence is: the history of modern unmentionables is long, but not overly illustrious.
Okay. That must be an essay called Your Unmentionables, I would imagine.
Yes.
A history of underwear.
Yeah.
Don't ask, I don't really even remember why it came up. It was just like, I was thinking about, I must have had something specific in mind, but I just began thinking about this, and I thought it would make a good essay. A little bit about, yeah. Oh, I remember. It was because the character that I called, what was her name now? St. James something. Anyway, the character in the book is this very, very beautiful woman who, again, has a real life person, very, very beautiful. She's now a doctor, a medical doctor, doing research at McMaster. But when I knew her, she was just a medical student, and we went out one afternoon, one evening, in the middle of a big party. We wanted to get more Coke or something for mix. So she asked me if I'd come with her, and sure, I said yeah. And we are walking by in the dark, but underneath a lamppost, we came across a group of 3 or 4 teenage boys who kind of boisterous, kids. But they took one look at her and they just shut up. They were awestruck by her beauty, which began me talking about, women's beauty and how is it like? What's it like for you to have to put up with all these men who are gaga over your physical voluptuousness, whenever all you want to do is learn medicine and be a doctor? And she said, well, men are idiots. And I wasn't about to disagree with that. I could fully concur. Men are idiots. And just to watch them around a beautiful woman, you can tell that they're idiots. But that got me thinking about, brassieres and underwear, lingerie, and so forth and so on. And so I spun it out into this bizarre little story.
The main character is Claire, right?
Claire, thank you.
You're welcome.
Claire. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know.
That's okay. Last question for you.
Surely.
What do you think that there is one main or a few main takeaways that you feel as though readers should walk away with after reading this book?
Well, I hope that they can see that even though there is no through line, like as you would find in a conventional collection, perhaps, or in a novel, or whatever, there is a kind of an attempt to gather up information on a similar subject matter. I think I spoke about the story being kind of structured, the stories, the entire book being structured under a little bit the same way that James Joyce structured Ulysses, which is to say that it begins very quietly, very normally, and then slowly begins to build up a swell of sorts. And as the day progresses, it gets more vivid, it gets more lively, it gets more extravagant. In Joyce's case, the stories just sort of begin to take on this kind of otherworldly extravagance. It's like, and every chapter is different, but you can see that the thing that's keeping them going, binding them together, is this kind of inevitable march towards some horrible climax of some kind that's bound to happen. But it doesn't happen until it happens. And I sort of had that same idea in mind. It was like a peaceful shore, then tumbling water, and then stormy seas, and then a big tsunami comes piling on top of you, and somehow it doesn't kill you. And then afterwards, well, in the case of Ulysses, afterwards, there is a kind of repercussive, gasping, relocating your head wherever it was during the course of the tsunami part, and taking a deep breath and saying, I'm glad that's over. And the same thing with my book. I'm comparing myself to James Joyce. How ridiculous is that? We're both Irish. That's it. That's where the comparison stops.
That's funny.
But that's kind of like what I had in mind. So if people can perceive that there is an internal logic to what appears to be kind of a disorderly collection, which is also disorderly on purpose because it's fragmented, like the personality it's describing has been fragmented. And so you've got all of these different things coming at you at the same time. But there is an underlying theme and there is an underlying movement of the stories, from the pastoral, the mild, the peaceful, into more and more intrepid, disturbing waters, until by the time you get to, well, in this case, Diablo meets the ghost of Kafka, I believe. It's in the form of a play, which, like Joyce, the Circe episode of Ulysses is also in the form of a play. So that's where that came from. I wrote it as though it were a play, and it's full of all kinds of crazy things that are all sort of like, I'm pulling information out of all the previous stories, trying to make sense of something, which ultimately I don't think is possible to make sense of it. But if people get that, if people get that about it, if they have the patience and the fortitude to deal with my nonsense in the meanwhile, eventually they will be richly rewarded, if not enlightened, at least rewarded in some way or another. So that's all I can do. It's all any writer could hope to do. I mean, An Irish Tale was much more linear. The story An Irish Tale was almost 200 pages long, so I think that's too long to qualify as a novella. But and then it threw in a bunch of other stories as well. But they all centered on Ireland and the Irish, the Irish stories that I was writing at the same time. They all got culled out into a book that had a very simple theme having to do with Ireland. Insignificant Others is a little bit more cerebral. I think you have to. It's describing something that really we don't have the vocabulary for. We don't really know how bad can get until it gets too bad, and too bad to put up with anymore. So it was a little bit more challenging. It was harder to write, harder to put together. My publishers were very patient. I rewrote, gigantic, huge sections of this book just to try to help clarify what I was up to. I don't know if I did, but I'm happy with the results, and that's what else can I do except make myself happy. There you have it.
There you have it. And this is, once again, Insignificant Others by Mr. Peter Fleming. And I want to encourage everyone who will be watching this video to come on by Hidden Gems Literary Emporium at 55B Moore Street in New Brunswick, New Jersey to get your copy. Or if you give us a call at 609-361-4331, we'd be happy to ship a copy to your home. Now, Mr. Fleming, if anybody wants to reach out to you personally to give you their feedback or ask a question, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
It's probably the only way is by way of my email. Wait, I've got a Facebook. I'm on Facebook, as you know, Peter Fleming 51, I think. I don't know. You'd have to look it up. So I'm on Facebook. I am accepting friends. how long they stay friends depends on how well behaved they are, which I'm sure is true of you as well. People need to behave themselves on Facebook better than they do, but or else by way of my Gmail account, which is Peter Fleming at gmail.com, however that goes. And that's in the book somewhere too, I think.
Yes, I just looked it up. Peadar, Peadar, Dar, Pleamonn.
Peter Fleming, yes.
At gmail.com.
At gmail.com. Yes, that's that, and I will respond to, you know, if there are any inquiries that come my way, I'll certainly respond to those. Yes, and the same with Facebook. Oh, I've got a website as well. For that, you should Google my full name, which is Peter George Eric Fleming, and that will take you directly to my website as well, which is a delightful place to be.
I'm looking at my spreadsheet. I'm like, what's his website? I'm going to have to Google you and find your website. Yes. And we'll
Peter George Eric Fleming.
Okay. And we'll be sure to share it with everyone that comes in and encourage people to go on our website and check out this video. And you've been phenomenal. I think you should do talks for people.
Yeah. Maybe you're right. I did some public readings, but you know, I prefer writing, I think, to reading my own work. But you know, I'm not a recluse or anything like that. I do get out of the house, and I'm no longer on antidepressants, and my psychiatrist has written me a clean bill of health.
That's great. That's excellent. You just, I feel as though your story can motivate a lot of people. You know, there are a lot of people who have been through a lot of things, and it's so interesting that we're having this conversation now, because I was chatting with someone on Facebook. We were talking about going through struggles in life, coming out of struggles, and then there was another person who came in who was saying, you know, there's so much darkness in the world, and there's this and there's that, you know. And then now I'm talking to you and hearing your story about how you came out of that dark place, and now here you are, and here we are.
Yes, and to all people everywhere, I would say, if you're looking for a message in my writing and in this book, or in what I'm saying now, it's a very simple message. Don't give up. There's always something good that can come out of, you know, bad things. In my case, that's certainly been true, but I think that's the plain truth in everyone's case. So don't give up.
I think that's a great place to end. We should make that a 10-second clip and just put that out there for people to just watch and say, you know what, Peter's right. I'm not going to give up today or tomorrow, or I'm not giving up. Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed you.
I'm glad to hear it. Are we off now?
We will be.
Okay.
Okay.